Hey everybody, my go-to YouTube guy T. Brent stopped doing these analysis and summaries on chapter 17. So I'm going to jump in now and try to do 17 and 18 and then do this for subsequent chapters. I've got my notes over here on the screen, so I'm going to be glancing over them as we go. So let's talk about chapter 17 first. I'm going to be using the study guide as my guide. So if you just even want to open up that study guide document, you can just follow along as we go. The first question has to do with Heck-Tate's testimony and ask you to summarize it. The most important thing to take out of Heck-Tate's testimony is that he establishes that Mayella Ewell had been beaten primarily on the right-hand side of her face. And that no doctor had been called, and so there was no evidence of a crime. This right-hand side of her face and the fact that she'd also been strangled around her entire neck will become important when we get more evidence in the upcoming chapters and pages. The other thing that's established is that Heck-Tate is a sympathetic character. He seems to be an ally of Atticus's, and while he might hold some of the racist tendencies that are prevalent in town, he also truly seems to feel like this is just not fair and that Bob Ewell is lying about this whole thing. And so it establishes Heck-Tate as an ally of Atticus. The next question asks you to describe the Ewell house. This is an important description because it's one more piece of evidence that shows just how despicable the Ewells are, but also just how far down in the social pecking order they are. The house is described as a shack that had previously been owned by African Americans. It's next to the dump. It talks about how the family scours the dump every single day for food and other items that they can get. It describes the house as being off-kilter on 4 rocks, and that the windows aren't really windows, they're just holes that are put into the walls. This whole thing is designed to give the Ewell household this sense of being off-kilter and not quite right. The yard is actually described as a yard that was designed by an insane child, which I think is a wonderful image to use in this. The fact that they're living in a shack that was previously inhabited by an African American family also indicates that aside from the color of their skin, in terms of the social order and where they're actually below the African American community that's been marginalized, but they don't act as if they're below it because of their white skin. Bob Ewell is going to be called to the stand next, and it's his arrogance, his absolute convinced attitude that he can do no wrong and that the town is going to support him in his lie, again because the town's racist attitudes and because he is white. Number 3 asks you to describe Bob Ewell's physical traits and his personality. He's described as like a rooster of a man who struts up to the witness stand and then almost makes fun of the process. At one point he says something inappropriate that gets the entire courtroom to laugh, and he sort of sits back satisfied that he's able to disrupt these proceedings. Again, the reader becomes really mad and enraged at Bob Ewell because it becomes clearer and clearer that he is lying, and yet he's so confident in this lie because he knows the town will back him up because of the town's racist attitudes. Number 4 ask you about Atticus and what he does with to Mr. Ewell during the cross-examination to prove or show. What happens there is that he gets Mr. Ewell to write on the back of an envelope, establishing that Mr. Ewell is left-handed. Going back to Heck-Tate's testimony, the fact that Mayella has bruises up and down the right-hand side of her face indicates that she was held by the neck and then beaten by somebody with a left hand. If you want to turn to your neighbor and pretend like you're beating them with your left hand, you'll see that you would be leaving most of the marks on that person's right hand side. And so Atticus is slowly building up the case that in fact it was Bob Ewell that beat and harmed Mayella and not Tom Robinson. We then move on to Chapter 18, where Mayella Ewell then takes the stand. Mayella is described as a sad, mousy character. She seems lonely and scared of her father, who drinks and beats her. There's a really unhealthy, almost icky feel to the relationship between the father and the daughter. And that sort of unhealthy, icky feeling is going to be intensified going forward, especially when Tom Robinson gives his side of the story. Scout feels sorry for Mayella because she lives in the sort of pigsty that was described before, but also that she just seems to be a very lonely character. At one point, Atticus asks her if she has any friends, and she seems confused by the question, as if she has never had friends and doesn't even understand the concept of what these friends would be. She also at one point refuses to talk to Atticus because she feels that Atticus is making fun of her. It comes out that she feels this because Atticus is calling her Ma'am and Miss Mayella. Scout at this point says that she had probably never been treated with this kind of respect, and because of that she felt that Atticus was making fun of her. The question 4 asks what's revealed when Tom Robinson stands up in front of Mayella, and that is that Tom Robinson's left arm is a foot shorter than his right arm and is a helpless appendage on his body. The Reverend explains to the children that Tom Robinson's hand had been caught in a cotton gin when he was a small child, and that ripped the muscles from his arm. The key thing here is that there's no way that he could have done the damage to Mayella's face and then held her by the neck while he was doing that without the use of both hands. And so the fact that he does not have the use of his left hand is very important here in establishing exactly who did this crime. At the end of both of these testimonies, while you still have Bob Ewell confident that he's going to get away with this lie, you also have the idea that Atticus has revealed the Ewell family for what they are. And so Bob Ewell might win this case because of the color of his skin, but his reputation, which was already pretty low in terms of the town's view of him, has really been crushed by Atticus. And Bob Ewell will have a really hard time holding his head up after this. Because of his personality, he is not going to learn from this. He's actually going to simply become more angry. So I hope that helped. If you have any questions, you can ask me in class, and we'll talk about chapters 19 and 20 in the next session. Thanks a lot.